You to Elevate for inviting myself and Stacey Fruitman to host this breakout on one of my favorites, SDG number 12, responsible consumption and production. Today's presentation is going to look at that SDG through the lens of fashion and the many different impacts that our clothes have on people and planet. I'm Drennan. I'm the founding executive director of Fashion Takes Action, which is Canada's nonprofit organization that's been working to advance sustainability in the entire fashion system since 2007. We have a school program for youth aged 8 to 17, and to date we've delivered that program to over 25,000 students across Canada. And through our many programs, including our annual conference, we've worked with over 2,000 industry stakeholders. A little bit about my background. 15 years ago, just before I started FTA, I was doing fashion PR and events, and I was a fashion addict. I was paid in clothes. I was the first to run out and spend my paycheck on clothing. And then I had 2 daughters. And I saw Al Gore's An Inconvenient Truth. And it was really at that point for me, my first aha moment, when I realized that the future for my daughters and the future of our planet was in jeopardy. And so I quit my job as a fashion publicist and started Fashion Takes Action. So today, we're going to look at some of the impacts of the fashion industry, as well as some of the impacts that we play, our role as consumers, and really some of the solutions that we can participate in as consumers. And then after my presentation, we'll go into a fireside chat with my friend and colleague, Stacey Fruitman. We'll talk about a lot of the cool innovations that are happening in the fashion industry to address these big problems. So we talk about these 5 big buckets in terms of the negative impacts of the industry: carbon, toxic chemicals, water, human rights and labor, and waste. So carbon is a big one in the fashion industry, and they say anywhere between 4 to 10% of global greenhouse gas emissions is generated through the fashion industry. And so this comes through in a number of different ways. One of them is transportation, all the shipping of our clothes. So it's not just that a garment is made in one factory and then sent to a retailer near you. If we're looking at cotton, for example, the cotton might be grown on a farm in a country, and then it will be shipped somewhere else in a different country to be spun into a yarn, yet again woven into a fabric, then again cut and sewn and dyed, and then finally to a retailer near you. So I say they, but statistics show that it's roughly 25,000 kilometers that a t-shirt will travel before it lands on your back, which is roughly 5 trips across Canada. Another impact area with carbon is in our synthetic clothing. So polyester, nylon, acrylic, spandex, your favorite athletic wear, yoga gear, all made from synthetics, which are derived from petroleum and are plastic. So to the tune of really 342 million barrels of oil every year that's used to make our synthetic clothing. Water is another really big issue in the fashion industry. First off is the amount of water that's actually used to make our clothes. This is an example here of a cotton t-shirt, which takes an average of 5 full bathtubs of water to make. Now, it's interesting because fashion also has a big data problem and science-based facts. And I actually just had to change the slide today because it was double that amount until recently. So we're now getting some more accurate facts, but still, it is a lot of water that is used to make our clothes. Next is microfibers. So you're probably familiar with microplastics, those tiny little bits of plastics that are floating around in the oceans. Well, microfibers are actually the single largest category of microplastics. And these are tiny, invisible fibers that are shed from our clothing, to the tune of 700,000 every time we wash our clothes. Now, they're also shed when we wear our clothes, and they also shed from natural fabrics as well as synthetic. But if you think about the aquatic life, all the fish that are accumulating these tiny invisible microfibers, it's basically plastic that is accumulating in the fish. And then we eat the fish, so you get it. Water pollution is also another big problem in the fashion industry. This statistic here is actually textiles in total, so not just fashion, but roughly 5,340,000 Olympic-sized swimming pools of fresh water are polluted every year by the textile industry. How? Well, a lot of the factories that are making our clothes are located in developing countries along the riverbanks. Often they have hidden pipes, and this wastewater effluent is just dumped into these nearby rivers and waterways, not only affecting the aquatic life, of course, but also the humans who rely on these water sources for anything from drinking to bathing and agriculture. So a huge problem, which leads to toxic chemicals. So there's roughly 8,000 synthetic chemicals used to make our clothes. And of that, only 1% are actually approved by the Environmental Protection Agency. Leather is one of the most toxic in the fashion industry, using a number of different carcinogenic substances like mercury, lead, chrome, all of which gets, well, usually dumped into the rivers, as I mentioned previously. Then you have cotton, so the pesticides that are used to grow conventional cotton. And here we see an image of an larger industrial farm that would use crop dusters to spray the pesticides onto the crops. Well, the problem here too is that this is airborne, so even nearby organic farms can be impacted by these pesticides, as well as the farmers that are working the fields. So this is an example of a smaller farm where they would actually have the farmers walking the fields, wearing a tank on their back, usually a very old, faulty, leaky tank, spraying the pesticides directly onto the plants. And you'll see here, they're not wearing protection. There's no mask, there's no gloves, so this really does have an impact on human health. Which leads me to human rights and labor in the fashion industry. This image might resonate with some of you. You might recall this is one of the most absolute, biggest tragedies in the fashion industry, which was the Rana Plaza factory collapse in Bangladesh on April 24th, 2013, where 1,133 garment workers were killed and thousands more were injured. So the safety conditions of the workers working in these factories needs a major improvement. And there's been some progress to date, but still a lot of our garment workforce is working in unsafe conditions. Child labor is still an issue in the fashion industry. Women and children make up about 85% of the global garment workforce. And children as young as 8 years old can often be seen making our clothes in these factories. They don't have really any other choice. They have to go to work. And of course, when you're not being paid a living wage or even a fair wage, this is what often happens. You get families working in the factories. And then there's forced labor. So for decades, Uzbekistan has had forced labor where mostly the entire population has to take unpaid leave from their work and then go and cultivate the fields, including children. So school closes down, all the kids, the teachers have to go out onto the fields and pick cotton. Most recently, in the Xinjiang region of China, there's been up to 80,000 Uyghur Muslims that have been forced to cultivate the cotton industry for fashion brands. So forced labor, major issue. And last but not least in the impact areas is waste. So we produce waste as consumers, but the industry also produces waste. And in total, it's about 92 million tons of textiles a year that are landfilled or incinerated. And according to the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, for every second of every day, the equivalent of one garbage truck full of textiles is landfilled or incinerated. So this waste comes from a few different sources. Post-industrial textile waste comes from the factory floor. So when a garment's being made, the offcuts, the fabric scraps, that's what's considered to be post-industrial. Pre-consumer waste is probably it's a growing problem, and this comes from a few different areas. One is damaged items, so a retailer receives a shipment and it's damaged and the cost to repair it is too high, so it gets put into the landfill. Other times they might overproduce, overorder, and there's a lot of excess inventory. So even after it's been marked down or sold to liquidation centers, it's still isn't being bought and it ends up in the landfill. And finally, we have returns. So today retailers make it so easy for us with free shipping to buy a garment in several different sizes because we don't know what our true size is. So we buy them in several sizes, we keep the one that fits, and then we send back the ones that don't. But the problem with this is that oftentimes the cost to restock that item is higher than the value of the item itself. And so you guessed it, it goes into the landfill or it gets incinerated. And then post-consumer textile waste, many of us are aware of. This is where we come in. This is our unwanted clothes. So when we stain a garment or if it gets a hole in it, it ends up going into the garbage because we think, why donate it? Someone's not going to want a shirt that's stained or a garment that has a hole in it. So we've just at Fashion Takes Action conducted Canada's first textile recycling feasibility study, and part of that was understanding how many textiles are actually ending up in Canada's landfills. And it's about 500,000 tons a year. So there's a lot of work to be done here. One last sort of problem area, I suppose you could call it, within the fashion industry is that it is opaque. Because of its size, this is a global, vast supply chain. You often don't know really what goes on behind the scenes, not only just as consumers, but the actual brands themselves. And so this lack of traceability, so if you think of traceability as knowing your supply chain and then transparency as showing your supply chain, you can't show, so you can't tell your stakeholders, your customers, what's going on until you first know it. And so now we're seeing a lot of, because there's a lot of pressure for the industry to be more transparent, to disclose how their clothes were made, who made them, in what conditions, there's now this move to traceability. So I think it'll be a few years off still before we see brands really stepping up in this way. I mean, there are leaders, and we'll talk a bit about that later on. And so it's easy to blame the industry for all of these problems, but we actually play a pretty big role as consumers as well. So overconsumption is a result of overproduction. We actually buy 60% more clothes today than we did 20 years ago, and we keep our clothes for half as long. So we do have an important role to play, and that's why at Fashion Takes Action we came up with the 7 R's of fashion. So you might be familiar with the 3R hierarchy of reduce, reuse, recycle. So we've introduced 4 more as a way for the average person to think about how to be more circular when it comes to their wardrobe, how to keep our clothes in use for as long as possible and out of the landfill. So first is reduce. As I mentioned, we're buying way too much. And in fact, we only wear 20% of our wardrobe 80% of the time. So we've got a lot of stuff in our closets that are not being worn, and it's time that we stopped buying new stuff, get reacquainted with what's in our closet, because you bought it at one point, there was a reason you bought it. So get back in touch with that and shop your closet. Reuse, of course, is another, it's one of my favorites, especially going to clothing swaps. I really love getting into, finding these treasures that are unwanted by someone else. So this is a really great way to reuse. Of course, thrifting, buying secondhand, vintage, those are also really great ways to reuse. But also outfit repeating. We're in this culture of, being seen, wearing something different every time. And thanks to celebrities, we're seeing them actually repeating, wearing the same outfits on the red carpet, which is great. Today, I'm wearing my signature outfit. I wear almost every single time I give a talk because it's important that we actually can repeat what we're wearing and not feel any guilt or shame for it. Repurposing, so upcycling is another term for this, where you basically take something old and you turn it into something new. So whether that's a stained t-shirt that you learn through YouTube DIYs how to turn into a tote bag or a macrame plant hanger, or maybe you don't fit into something the way you used to. So you can find, if you don't know how to yourself, find a seamstress or tailor to actually alter that garment. Repair is a big one, and this is something that, I have my daughters are teenagers now, and I really try and teach them how to, sew on a button or fix a hem, but a lot of this is lost. And so because we're, creatures of convenience and because of fast fashion, when we get a hole in the toe of our sock or the hem comes undone in our shirt or a button falls off, we simply throw it in the garbage. Again, going back to that idea of nobody's going to want a garment that's not in good condition, and we just don't take the time to actually repair it. And on that note of repair, it's really important to actually also understand caring for our clothes. So getting to stains right away, not washing our clothes every single time we wear them, giving them a longer life through things like even hanging them up at the end of the day or putting them away instead of just throwing them on the floor. These are really simple tools and solutions that we can play as a consumer. Moving on to resale. This has been around for a while, Facebook Marketplace, Kijiji, but now we're seeing some really cool peer-to-peer apps popping up like Poshmark, where we can actually both sell and buy secondhand clothing through these apps. So again, giving a longer life to our clothes. Rental is, of course, another one, and I think we'll talk a little bit about that in the fireside chat portion of today. But again, this idea of not having to own a garment and sort of being a part of the sharing economy when it comes to our wardrobe. And finally, because it still does belong at the end of the hierarchy, is recycling. And it's not something that we do. It's not like we take our clothes and we put them in our recycling bin along with all of our plastic bottles and paper and things like that. What we do is we donate it, because no textile should end up in the garbage. So there is a supply chain that basically works on sorting and grading all of these donated textiles so that what isn't fit for reuse or resale will actually get shredded down into shoddy and turned into things like insulation. So on that note, that's the end of my presentation on the impacts of fashion and what some of the solutions are as consumers. And now we will turn our focus onto some of the solutions that are happening in the industry, some really cool innovations that are addressing a lot of these impact areas. So thank you, and I'll just end that, and I'm going to turn it over to Stacey.
Hello.
Hey, Stacey. So glad that you could be here today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so before we dive in, why don't you explain a little bit about Style with Substance Ventures?
Sure. Style with Substance, what we do is we work with early stage companies that have innovations or technologies to reduce the environmental impact of the fashion industry.
That's amazing. And Stacey was actually a former board member of Fashion Takes Action, so good friend and colleague. So yeah, I mean, I'm excited to have this conversation just to dive into some of these innovations and solutions that are addressing some of the problems that I outlined. And I mentioned the 7 R's of fashion and how these are great tools for us as consumers, but it's so interesting to see now that the industry is also embracing these more circular business models. We have rental made popular by Rent the Runway and Canada's former Rent, Frock, Repeat. We're seeing, brands like H&M Canada has launched a resale program through their Rewear. And then, of course, repair, we're starting to see some brands now getting into that game. So you don't have to go to a tailor or seamstress and have your garment repaired. You can just take it back to the store. So yeah, just on that sort of topic, I'd love to know if you have any innovations that come to mind around these sort of circular business models.
Sure. Well, to your point, first of all, I'd say in the past 3 to 5 years, we've seen tremendous scalability. Because the Poshmarks and the ThredUps and the Rent the Runways that were startups maybe 5-7 years ago, they're huge. An interesting note that there's the ThredUp resale report, and in 2020, so during the pandemic when a lot of people were home, they couldn't go to stores, they started playing around with this. And in 2020, 33 million people bought something secondhand for the first time.
Wow.
So it's massive. It's really changing. In terms of technologies, I think that, you know, there's not a lot new, but I think what is new, and you spoke to this, is brands and retailers really getting into this game. There's been some that have been doing this for a while, like Patagonia or Eileen Fisher,
right,
with Green Eileen. But we're seeing, like, one of the companies that I do work with called Recurate, they're working closely with brands, and they're looking to see what the brand objective is. And working with brands and using the technologies with the brands, what's I think interesting is that customers are already on the website. So you already have the digital asset, especially if you've bought something there. So you could see a sweater that's new, side by a sweater that's already been worn, and you could see the price difference, you could see the quality difference, and the customer can make the choice. But I think what's interesting for the brand perspective is that you're still engaging with the customer. The other thing is that you're potentially gaining new customers, because a jacket that may be normally $250 may not be in the snack bracket for people, but if it's now $100, that's something that maybe they would be willing to spend. So I think it's a huge growth area. We're going to see a lot more of that happening. And then the other thing is partnerships and collaborations. So you mentioned the H&M, which is exciting because it's happening in Canada. It's being tested in Canada. And there was also one with ThredUp and Madewell. And what ThredUp saw is that there were so many Madewell and the brand is called Madewell, not it's Madewell. The brand is Madewell. There's so many Madewell garments that they work together now, and I believe it's in Brooklyn. I'm not 100% sure, but there's a store now where the second level is all second hand or already used Madewell garments. So it's a very interesting time, and we'll see what happens.
I love when you just talked about that sort of accessing a garment that might be more expensive. It just came to mind, actually, the Renewal Workshop, because you know, there's this another startup that has basically working with a number of brands, and the North Face always comes to mind because it was one of their first brand partners, where, you know, and I talked about before that the sort of damaged product that arrives, which often just goes into the landfill. So Renewal Workshop has basically created a system where they can clean and repair those damaged items before they're actually hitting the shelves. And so the retailer is allowed to actually, or enables them to slightly discount the garment, but it opens up a whole new category of customers for them that wouldn't be able to otherwise afford a brand new North Face coat, for example. Yes. So yeah, super
and
cool.
And a new revenue stream. So
totally.
That's really important.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mentioned earlier in my presentation about recycling, and I wanted to just spend a little bit of time on that because I think it still is something that's pretty confusing to the average person. So there's two types of recycling for textiles. So there's a mechanical technology, and then there's chemical technology. So the mechanical way of basically recycling textiles has been around for a while. That infrastructure exists in Canada. It's typically made into things that you don't see. It's not aesthetically pleasing. It's stuff that lives behind the walls, like insulation or under the carpet, under padding, and things like that. I'm actually really excited because we're partnering with the Environment and Climate Change Canada on a recycling pilot, mechanical recycling pilot. So we're going to be making a product that's going to be sold in stores that is consumer facing. So anyone out there is interested in learning a little bit more about our pilot, you're welcome to go to fashiontakesaction.com/circularity, and you can find out some details there. But the chemical recycling is really interesting because this is, you know, the truly sort of garment to garment, right? So it's taking a t-shirt and turning it into a new t-shirt. Whereas the mechanical recycling, you can take a garment, but you're not going to be turning it into another garment. You're turning it into some other sort of product, right? So, you know, I'd love to know, in your opinion, sort of what are some of the really cool, innovative solutions around now in this chemical recycling space?
Well, I guess I've mentioned to you, Kelly, like, I can't say that I'm an expert because it's very technical. There are definitely experts out there, and there's a lot of investment. So this is now moving to the point where we hope to see scalability in the next couple of years, but it really still is in the research pilot mode. We have H&M, they're merging, or they're working closely with Hong Kong Research Institute of Technology, of Textile and Apparel. In Sweden, there's a lot of work being done. So there's mega brands, a mega investment, because this is a potentially a huge way to change this industry. But in the meantime, there are still smaller companies and innovators doing work. We both met Stacey Flynn from Evernew that's working with cotton. There's a company called Circ in the US. Circular Systems is doing work. And I wanted to also bring up a couple of really interesting startup brands that are thinking in the circular model. And when I think about their design, it's not just about the design of the products, it's the design of, you know, what goes in the products and what happens when the product is finished. And that's what circular design is. So for an example, one called For Days, F-O-R, Days. When you're finished with this white t-shirt, you could send it back to them and they go through a recycling process. And then you can have credits towards other products. And another one, and it's actually part of the Style with Substance portfolio, is called Thousand Foul. And it's similar, that there were several years dedicated to researching the recyclability of the product to be used. And also, if you think of a shoe, for example, they have white running shoes. There are so many components. And how do you break apart those components so each one of them is recyclable, excuse me. And then they've created a whole program. So it makes it easy for the consumer. They partnered with TerraCycle and they partner with shipping companies. And so that way it's easy for the consumer to purchase a product, and when it gets all mucky or worn down, they can send it back very easily and get money towards the next one. So I think that that's really quite exciting with recycling. But we're going to see what happens, I think, in the next couple of years in terms of the scalability of chemical recycling. It's coming for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the reasons that we chose to focus on mechanical recycling is just that infrastructure exists now, right? And because of the study we did where we found that 500,000 tons of textiles are ending up in Canada's landfills, it was like, okay, we need a solution for right now, a short-term solution, because we hopefully will see this chemical recycling at scale, as you mentioned, in the near future. So, you know, there's a lot of, as I mentioned in my presentation, there's so many other areas that need to be improved. And I'm just wondering, in your opinion, sort of what are some of those critical areas that are in development in terms of solutions for the fashion industry that will have, you know, the biggest impact?
Well, I think that, you know, one area which I think is really, really exciting is material science. I think it's very cool.
Yeah.
Like when I see a bag made of cactus leather, I just, wow, that's so interesting. You probably, maybe some of you have heard about pineapple leather. There's a company called Bolt Threads, and I loved hearing the CEO speak when we went to Remo that time, because they were talking about looking at spider webs and different kinds of spider webs and analyzing that and using that to create silk fibers. So I think that's really fascinating. Bolt Threads also has something called Milo, and what I love is that there's an actual Milo consortium of huge brands that are participating. So the Canadian vegan brand Matt and Nat is part of it, Lululemon's part of it, Stella McCartney, excuse me, just launched a bag. So there's all these companies working together in terms of material science. One other company in Style with Substance is called Circular Systems, and I was really excited about AgroLoop, which is taking crop waste and turning that crop waste into fiber. And another one that I'm really, really excited about is a Canadian female-founded tech company called Alttex, so A-L-T-T-E-X. And
out of U of T?
Yeah, it's part of the University of Toronto incubator, and just received some funding, and they're also taking food waste, and this goes to your point about athletic wear, and turning it into a polyester type of fabric. So there's that. I don't know if you want to talk about traceability at this point.
Yeah, no, I just think it's just on that note of material science. I think it's just so exciting to see fashion at the intersection of, you know, not only innovation and technology, but science. You know, I remember at one of our wear conferences, we had a speaker who was talking about, you know, kombucha leather that was, you know, being basically made in a lab. Like it's just, there's just so, like, people think of fashion and they think of a job in fashion and it's like fashion design, but there's just so much out there. There's so many really interesting innovations and ideas and creative thinkers that are working to solve these problems. It's so great.
And I think what, just to that point, I think it's also really exciting that we're actually going back to nature, right? We're looking at nature and then we're bringing in modern day science, and we're combining it. And ultimately, it's because we want to make sure that if it is eventually disposed, it's not hurting the environment.
Well, that's it.
So I think it's a fascinating place to be. And to your point, like, so all the students that are watching, think about different careers, and you can impact the fashion industry. There's a lot of room here. Absolutely,
absolutely. So I did mention in my presentation about how opaque the industry is because of the fact that this is, it's a vast supply chain, and it's an area that poses a lot of risks and challenges for brands when they can't really not only be transparent and talk about what they're doing, but they don't even know what to talk about because they can't even trace their supply chain. So just wondering if you have any sort of favorites, any examples of some startups that are really addressing the transparency issue in the fashion industry.
Yeah, I'll talk about the two that I love.
Yeah, I think I know them, and I think I love them too.
Well, we know about Eon is someone that's creating a digital passport because, cool. As you mentioned, I mean, the supply chain it's also very like confusing. There's just so many different directions. Yeah. A simple pair of shoes could have 100 different suppliers participating. So it's really important. So if a brand is going to say that they're sustainable, people are going to ask, "Are you sure?" Like go back throughout the supply chain. So something like a digital passport will track that. And the other one is Queen of Raw, and it's actually showcasing traceability within an organization. So Stephanie Benedetto, the founder of Queen of Raw, co-founder, she noted, this is the stat that always strikes me, is that there's enough dead stock. So dead stocks is rolls of fabric that were purchased but never used. But there's enough dead stock in the world today to make 5 t-shirts for every human being on this planet.
Wow.
Okay. But a lot of companies may not even know it's there. They lose track of it. So this is a way of tracking your waste. And then with Queen of Raw, they're actually turning some of that waste into profit. And it's just a
because it's otherwise just sitting on a shelf, right? You might as well.
And instead of actually producing and using the resources to produce new fabric, you already have fabric already made.
And there's blockchain technology involved in that too, right?
Yes, there is.
Yeah. So
I
again,
can't speak too much to that.
I know. It still really confuses me as well. But yeah, so I guess because we, there's probably a lot of, as you mentioned, students and entrepreneurs and startups that are tuning in today. I'd love to know, because you do work so closely with startups, what level of support is available out there for startups that are working really hard to solve these problems?
I think especially now, the past year, 18 months, 24 months, more of the incubators are looking at fashion. I think that before there was a disconnect. Well, why is fashion tech and clean tech? I don't know. So I think that there's just more of that. But specifically for the fashion industry, there's check out Fashion for Good. It's an excellent resource, Global Change Award, New York Fashion Tech. But in Toronto, I'm an advisor with the Ryerson Fashion Zone, and it's an amazing place. A really strong community that has mentors and advisors and a lot of other support systems. George Brown Fashion Exchange. There's Fashion Tech. So do some research, and you can also reach out to either of us, and we can tell you some more.
Yeah, absolutely. So curious to know too. Because of the sort of UN SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals that are sort of framing today and this whole week of conference, I'd love to sort of touch on another one of my favorites, probably my second one, which is number 17, Partnerships for the Goals. And in your opinion, like what does that look like from in the future of fashion and specifically in this sort of tech startup space?
100% believe that collaboration is key. In this ecosystem, we all have to work together because everybody has a role. So the innovators have a role. They're the ones that are nimble. They're the ones that are the risk taker. They're the ones that are going to come up with these new ideas and actually work at it and see if there's traction. And the brands are watching those. You have the big brands and retailers. They're the ones that are going to make the biggest impact just because of their sheer numbers. Impact in terms of carbon and water and energy. But I think that the innovators have a huge impact too, and impact is different. Impact is changing behavior, coming up with new ideas, and even the positive energy surrounding, doing something different and unique. A lot of young people want to work in these types of companies. Consumers are a big part of the ecosystem. Government, like everybody needs to collaborate. And I just have a quick example of a collaboration that I love that just happened. It's called Rebel Stork. They sell baby gear, and they just collaborated with the Hudson's Bay Company, which is the oldest retailer in Canada and potentially North America, maybe probably one of the oldest in the world. And you could see that you have an innovative company that's doing something really unique and interesting, and then you have a heritage brand. And if the heritage brand did this on their own, I don't know, maybe it could have been interesting, but I think when they merge with an innovator, there's just more authenticity there.
Absolutely.
And it's good for both.
Yeah.
So that's just an interesting example, and I do believe that, and it is happening a lot. We're seeing a lot more brands and retailers collaborating with smaller innovators.
Yeah, and I think, from our perspective, we always talk about how the only true way to accelerate sustainability in this industry is through 3 key areas. So one is investment. That's huge, right? We need more investors to step up like you and really support these startups and these innovative ideas. Innovation, of course, is another big one. And collaboration, because you're right, nobody can do this. Nobody can fix this problem and change a system in a silo, right? We all need to be working together, and time is of the essence. We can't duplicate efforts and reinvent the wheel. Right. We need to be better as an industry, which traditionally hasn't been very collaborative. It's been much more competitive than collaborative. So that's really interesting.
I just want to say one final point on that, which is interesting, because whenever I work, this is so much why I love this industry so much, because I work with so many different people, same with you. I don't think I've ever had a time where an entrepreneur wasn't open to meeting another entrepreneur, even if they were close in terms of what they were trying to do, because underlying with everyone's mission or values, whatever you want to say, underlying everybody has the same one, or at least one of them is they want a better planet. They want to do what they can to make this a better place. And we can all agree upon that in this part of the industry. And I'm so thrilled to see that more and more companies, I actually feel like if you're a brand or a retailer right now not looking at this, doing this, making this a priority, I don't know how much longer they're going to be around, because consumers are now demanding it.
Absolutely.
So that's what I have to say. So it's exciting. Thanks for having us elevate. It's good to have us at the innovation table.
I know, right? Yes. To have fashion as a topic, it's so great. And I guess before we move over to some of the questions that are coming in from the audience, I know, and this is something that I really firmly believe in, and that it's about progress and not perfection. And that could be said both from the industry, but also as consumers. Perfection doesn't exist. So as consumers, we can't beat ourselves up over the fact that, not 100% of our wardrobe is sustainable. But make some changes, and smaller steps actually makes a difference. And the same can be said about the industry. Nobody is going to be able to turn a ship overnight. There's just, as demonstrated today, there's a lot of problems. So as long as brands are starting to do something, but more importantly, they need to do a better job of talking about what they're doing. And so that's unfortunate, because it doesn't allow for the average person who likes to buy clothes to really understand what is happening and the changes that are happening, because they're waiting until they're perfect before they talk about it. 100%. So that is something I definitely would love to see change.
It doesn't hurt to say that this is our goal and this is what we're moving towards.
Exactly.
And this is, because then at least consumers know, okay, they get it. Okay, I understand that you can't do everything tomorrow, but at least that's where their direction is. And I think that's way better than not saying anything at all.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, thanks so much for that chat. I see that there are a few questions that have come in. So first of all is, how has social media impacted fast fashion and micro trends? Yeah, well, this goes back to what I was talking about before about, being an outfit repeater and re-wearing our clothes, because social media has sort of created the opposite of that. It's, people who are really concerned about, their feed and deleting photos if they're seen wearing the same thing twice in their feed. And then you've also got these haulers, I don't know if you've heard of the YouTubers that do these hauls where they go out and they just go buy everything they can find on sale, and then they come back and then they open up their bags and they're just showing off all these clothes that they got for $1.99 and $5.99. It's just like,
Oh, I thought you were talking about, because I was kind of obsessed with people doing that, but at thrift stores.
Oh, thrift hauling. Okay, okay.
It was really fun. Like they go for $5, they get a big bag, and then they would show it, and they'd have a studio, and then they would say, okay, I could actually put this, like I could sell this for, I bought it for $1.99, but I could sell it for $35, and they.
Oh, okay. Well, that's a little bit.
On YouTube, it's kind of fun, and then they sell, it's a business. It's a side business.
Yeah, I can see that. It's better for sure.
It's more
but
for selling.
yeah, I mean, social media definitely has fueled, I think, overconsumption. And again, these idea of micro trends. You know, this. You know, we used to have 2 seasons, maybe 4 seasons. Now we have 52 seasons. Every week, something new is being put out onto the shelves and onto the store floors. So again, it comes back to that idea of always being seen, wearing something new and different. Okay, the next question, and I see the first word and it's like my favorite topic. Yeah. Thrifting is a great alternative to buying new, but sizing is limited and ethical clothes are expensive. Are there any companies making affordable, sustainable fashion? Well, that is a really great question, because you're right. I often would say that sustainable fashion represents the true cost of a garment. When you buy something for $4.99, you have to know that there were people who were not paid fairly to make those clothes. And so when you invest in your wardrobe and you invest in something that was well-made, quality, or sustainable, it's an investment, it's for sure, but offsetting that cost by buying secondhand is a great way. But you're right, if the sizing is limited, I mean, I would say vintage sizing for sure is much more limited, but I think that there's a lot of newer clothes that are being made in a very large variety of sizes, and so the newer stuff that you'll see in thrift shops definitely could accommodate. In terms of companies that are making affordable, sustainable fashion, and I hate to say fast fashion and sustainable fashion shouldn't really be used in the same sentence, but it's not going anywhere. And so it's really the responsibility of these fast fashion brands to step up and show leadership. And one that has done so repeatedly is H&M. Say what you will about, and again, it comes back to perfection. They're not perfect. They're not claiming to be perfect. But in terms of affordability, they've definitely made sustainability a lot more affordable for the average person.
I was going to just mention an idea, and I think because we're moving towards this, where pricing for organic content will go down. But on a positive note, and more in the textile industry, I actually had to go buy some new towels, and it was really nice to see. I went to the Bay for the first time, probably in a long time, and I saw green certification towels and regular towels the same price.
Great.
So hopefully, those are those types of textiles, but hopefully that is also going to shift. But I think, and if you look at ThredUps and Poshmarks, there's so much product right now. Yeah. Millions and millions and millions of pieces that you are gonna, if you look, you are gonna see the different sizing right now.
Yeah. Okay, and it looks like our final question is it truly possible to produce sustainable fashion overseas in large quantities? Should we be focused on increasing Canadian manufacturing or improving the current process? Okay, yeah, another really great question. Okay, so truly possible, let's tackle the first part of it. Truly possible to produce sustainable fashion overseas. Yes, I think so. I think that we're seeing a lot, well, not a lot, we're seeing a few examples of leadership, and everything from, setting science-based targets and reducing emissions to cleaning up the water to paying fair living wages. There are some really great examples of brands that are doing that. And it's just a little bit slower for everybody to sort of follow suit there. But to your point about increasing Canadian made, absolutely. Local manufacturing was a big industry in Canada until the North America Free Trade Act. It basically went offshore because of the cost of labor. Unfortunately, it's the problem here in Canada is that a lot of that talent is aging or have deceased. And so we don't really have a lot of those skills. And we talked about jobs earlier, and the sort of glamour of being a designer. But startup and innovation is great too, but so is actually learning how to sew clothes. This is a skill that doesn't exist. So it's not so much a matter of, it's the workforce is really gone. And so I think that there needs to be more investment in academia and in actually training and building those skill sets of future garment workers so that we can bring manufacturing back onshore.
Definitely. Well, that's why the Georgetown Fashion Exchange was launched.
Yes.
For the future of fashion, and also rebuilding the skill sets and rebuilding skill sets for this new technology, like laser cutting, things like that. So that would be interesting. And there is, I think with the pandemic, and we're talking about Canada, I think it became very obvious that we were lacking in textile manufacturing.
Yes.
And eventually, there are more masks being produced here, and hopefully that raised some eyebrows at, well, whoa, what happened? We need to have more manufacturing at home. But I do want to give an example of a company, Ecologist, that actually just brought over an old factory in Victoria, and it's bringing as much of their product as possible to be made in the factory, and the factory is also a store, because they want people to come in, whether they buy something or not, but to start to really understand what it takes to make a product.
Right.
Like, it doesn't just go like this. That's why when Kelly mentioned for $4.99, a shirt, probably nobody's making any money on that. It's just almost impossible. And so to go back and see, well, what does it take to make a quality garment? I think we're going to see more and more of that happening.
Yeah. Well, I think as the more consumers become aware of what it takes to make the true cost of our clothes, then we might be able to see this. And I think just quickly on that note too, like on-demand manufacturing, I think is really neat. And I think that that's something, so rather than sort of making these big estimates as to, maybe fluorescent green is going to be the next big color next season, and you go out and you overproduce and you make millions of these units of this fluorescent green item. I think on-demand manufacturing is a really great way to be economical and to obviously reduce waste. So yeah. Well, I think that's about time. So I hope I thank you so much for joining us today, and I hope that there's one or two takeaways from our talk today that you can look at personally in your own life, and how you might be able to rethink the way you purchase and care for and dispose of your clothes. But also, hopefully, there's some of you out there who are inspired by the many types of different innovations and technologies that are being used to address a lot of these problems in the fashion industry. So thank you so much, and thank you so much, Stacey.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And thanks to Elevate.
Yes. Enjoy your day.